So I've covered the idea of bathos and pathos, where something gets in the way, and I've talked about pacing and in general the beats of the story. But how does one actually build to a climax of a story?
And welcome back to the heart of the stories we tell. I'm Rob, the host, and this is another look deep into what makes a story, a theory on storytelling by a storyteller who believes that every story has merit. And tonight's episode is.
Building to a climax. As someone who's trying to write his own stories, I have to say it's one of those things that kind of bugs me. We've talked about a bunch of things, and we're going to come back to the Chekhov's gun, but part of all of this, part of foreshadowing and red herrings, and part of beats and pacing, and when the pathos gets in the way of the bathos, is the basic elements, the DNA of the story. We need events and incidents that raise the stakes to a big resolution. Anyone who's watched Game of Thrones knows that any good episode is ramping up and ramping up and ramping up, and then boom, something big happens. But there's a lot to unpack here. For what I do is I come up with these theories by reviewing shows off and on, TV shows, books, movies, you name it, and then coming up with how and why we tell stories on episodes like this. If that sounds interesting, click subscribe, because like I said, we're going to dig into the basic building blocks of story today, which includes building to a resolution. And if ever there was an example of where that went wrong, it is the TV show Lost. They started off building all of these little mystery boxes, and I give Abrams a lot of shit for his mystery boxes. But they didn't know where they were going. So yeah, there were some funny jokes, including a red herring that they cut up in the season opener for the last season. But at the end of the day, ABC and the writers couldn't really build to a satisfying finale because they didn't know what the finale was. If you don't know where your story ends, how can you get there? Now, G.R.R. Martin goes on to say that there is this whole difference between being a gardener and being a planner. And I've heard it a lots of different ways, and there's good and there's bad with both. But even if you're just flying by the seat of your pants, I think you need a plan. But there's more to it than that. We have Avengers Infinity War coming out. What, in about 3 weeks, 4 weeks? Obviously, they've been building to this for a while. I don't quite believe they've been building to it since the first Avenger movie, but not too long afterwards. We see lots of shows and movies that have been hinting at where things are going in the Marvel Universe, but I honestly feel that their plan falls apart on multiple levels. And the biggest is that problem with bathos. The problem where they can't take themselves seriously enough to build to a dramatic moment. And I hope I'm wrong, because I really don't want to have the same feeling I had walking out of Ragnarok. But I also don't want this to be talking about the bad examples, and those two were. So let's talk about a good example for a minute. Stranger Things, both season 1 and season 2 did an amazing job. They introduced you to characters, they made you feel for the characters, and even when things slowed down, when the plot wasn't developing at super fast speeds, you were getting to know these people, you were getting into their lives, and you were building the dramatic tension of the fact that you wanted them to succeed in all of these different ways, and all of the ones that you walked into, all of the little moments, even characters you thought were assholes at some points, had these big dramatic builds and crescendos where you just, the story grabbed you and just kept going. I know they already said that there were 3 or 4 more seasons planned out, and I believe it. They obviously have built an entire mythology there, an entire idea that each episode crescendos, the season crescendos, and I'm sure that when it's all said and done, we are going to love Stranger Things. But how did they do it? Well, they just did simple character arcs, really. And if you want to see the simplest form of that, look at the Netflix Voltron. This is not a show that is in any way complex or in any way meant to really challenge your thought process. But they have characters that they give you basic premises, and they grow and they change, so you feel for them. And then they do some rather non cartoony, pretty big change stuff. But at the same time, it's still just basically an 80s cartoon slightly revamped. What we have is the concept of a giant robot fighting giant monsters. Who doesn't love that? But At its heart, we've built slowly upon each individual build-up allies, enemies, characters that we feel, that we get to know, that in some way, shape, or form we care about. And as such, as each season, which are very short in these cases, we're down to only having 3 or 4 or 5 episodes per season now, you still get a build. You still get, hey, things are getting rougher. Hey, here's new information. Hey, here's something you didn't know. Hey, this is all building on itself. But even from season to season, they're building on things. There's this whole mystery with one of the black pilots, the Shiro, that we don't even know what's going on and whether or not Hagar has mind controlled him. And our main villain, he actually died this season. But even that wasn't a climax directly. That was just part of building the overall tapestry. You know what other show really did a good job at doing that? Westworld, and it's getting ready to come back. So there's part of me that really wonders how they're going to build on what they did in season 1 all over again. And this one is one of those complex thought processes. I mean, every episode taught me a new level of either psychology or video game engineering, you name it, because every episode had multiple layers. I've watched as 2 other reviewers have gone back and rewatched the episodes one at a time and done them as we were leading up to this. And there are things that even now I catch that they missed on their first viewing and I missed on my first viewing because the story is told so out of sequence. We come to love and adore one character just to find out he's the character we've hated since the first episode. Just because, I mean, that's part of out of sequence storytelling. And again, they give us obvious cause and effect, and they give us great characterization. And they bring these things, not even, I hesitant to say in a realistic way, because there's nothing realistic about this park, but in a way that feels authentic. Their actors can bring them to life. And because of that, even when something outlandish happens, we can buy into the fact that this is what's going on, the maze. And it's a story that's going to take a huge sharp turn on what it's all about in season 2. But there's still a major following. We all really want to know who or what is going on. What is Bernard going to do now that he knows the truth? But alright, those were all great examples. But let's break down for a minute what actually is going on here. Okay, so I've been pretty specific with how things build. Let's talk a little more general for a second. Let's talk about the fact that part of the idea is that you start off slow and ramp up, and as you expect more, you get more. Wikipedia says rising action is the rising action, a series of events build towards the point of greatest interest. The rising action of a story is the series of events that begin immediately after the exposition and introduction of the story and builds to the climax. Okay, well, there's a couple different ways we can do this. We talked about the 3 and 5 part act structures in the past, both of which basically make a mountain. Now, depending on which one of those there is, depends on whether it's a long grade up one side and a short the other, or equal on both. The 9-act structure is a little different. That's the screenplay structure. So a lot of the times when we get into TV shows, especially things like the superhero shows I review, they work more on the 9-act structure as they are built to accommodate commercials. Now, I have complained and I have enjoyed different ones over the years, and I don't think any one of them is necessarily the correct one. I've seen TV shows do 3-act structures instead of 9. I've seen movies do 12-act structures, to be honest, if you look at a couple of them. But the basis is the same. You begin the story, things go wrong, tension gets added, till finally, boom, we resolve it. Now then, the resolution could be good or bad. It could be, hey, the resolution of Empire Strikes Back is a pretty downer ending. The bad guys are pretty much winning, the good guys are barely holding together. But that's still a climax, a resolution. Let's quickly just brainstorm a quick series of events that could be building towards a climax. You go to the bank. You fill out the withdrawal slip. You go to the teller. The teller tells you you're overdrawn. You can't withdraw more money. Now what? Well, you start to panic. Then you realize that your direct deposit didn't go through. So you call your employer and ask them why your direct deposit didn't go through. They explain there's a problem. It'll go through tomorrow. Now you're worried because you have these overdraft notices and they're going to take more money out of your account. So you talk to the branch manager and ask them to waive the fees. Now they say they will. Okay. So they're going to waive the fees as a one-time help. You're going to get your paycheck tomorrow. Now you just need to worry about how you're going to eat tonight. Hopefully you have ramen noodle at home. The end. It's a relatively boring story, but it's pretty easy. The action is all internal and is all emotional, not physical. But at the end of the day, it builds the series of events that are bad things happening to you until you finally get to the end and realize how it resolves, and then come down from the resolve. It's a basic plot structure. Now, in the case of things like TV shows, what happens is you need a small block. You need a TV episode, and you need a season, and you need a structure for the entire series. Now, some are just episodic, it doesn't matter. In the case of Netflix, they have masterminded and perfected the idea of the binge watch. The idea that each episode builds into the next one, into the next one, into the next one. And in doing so, means that each episode not only ends on a climax that could be the end, but leaves just enough unresolved to make you want to come back for that next episode. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Except instead of a commercial break, it's roll the credits. And hey, do you want to see what happens next? Because the next episode starts in 3, 2, and there you go. You're into the next Netflix episode. Other than calling it the binge watch structure, I'm not quite sure what you'd call it. I'm going to have to look into that. But in the meantime, you can see where several of those shows that I've referenced work or don't work because the build has a problem, or the build leads to nothing. Now I'm going to take the two that I specifically called out as problematic, Lost and the MCU, and take a look at them again for a second. Let me just start by saying the MCU is great. The Winter Soldier is my second favorite, and Black Panther is my third favorite comic book movie of all time. But the problem I keep seeing, Doctor Strange especially, is bathos. The idea that mid-climb, in that dramatic build moment, there's jokes. And sometimes those jokes take away from the story. And I'm deathly afraid that going into Infinity War, which is supposed to be super serious, we also have things like Thor Ragnarok that were super jokey. So what's going to happen come Infinity War? Is it going to be Winter Soldier seriousness with only a few jokes? Or is it going to be Thor Ragnarok where he throws a ball against a window and almost knocks himself out? Now that we've talked about how ratcheting up the tension is supposed to work, do you see that? And if so, maybe you're going to see the problem with the other one, and that was Lost. We kept ratcheting things up perfectly. In fact, it was the exact opposite of the MCU. It wasn't the fact that they didn't have a good sense of terror and a sense of what's going to happen next. It's they didn't know what was going to happen next. And as such, when the climax came, we were like, but that doesn't really explain everything. That kind of doesn't even work with everything. And wait, he just what? That doesn't what? Well, they didn't know. How could they build to the proper ending if they didn't know the ending? The short answer is they couldn't, and I understand that. But I'm just always afraid that when people like Abrams are involved, that mystery box could just jeopardize the build, as they built the wrong thing. But as we walk through the heart of the stories we tell, I always like to ask for your comments. And this week, because I'm kind of being a little more open-ended, I'm more interested than ever. What do you think about ratcheting up the tension? What do you think about ratcheting up the action? Let me know in the comment section below. Also, let me know that, you think I'm deadly wrong about the MCU, or that I was wrong about Lost. It made perfect sense, because I'd love to hear you defend both of them. Or if you think that Voltron doesn't do it well, or that you think that Stranger Things had a similar problem to one of the others, because I would love to hear that too, because dissenting opinions are what make us able to discuss these things. And just a quick programming note, I'm taking April 1st, April Fool's Day / Easter, off, so there will be no video next week. But then come back the week after for another exciting look at my ideas and storytelling. But if you like this one, hit that thumbs up, share the video, and of course subscribe, because we're here to talk about stories, how they're written, why they're written, and the different ways we tell them. Because I think that's interesting, and there's at least 100 of you that agree, so come on. And besides, I just went 15, 16 minutes talking about building to a climax, and I didn't make a sex joke. That should get me an award. Come on. I hope you have a good night, and thank you for walking with me through the heart of the stories we tell.